Hey there, pirates. Welcome aboard the Anime No Me channel. Maybe Roger's illness was never just a simple disease. Maybe it wasn't just a medical issue, some random organic condition. Maybe it was the direct reflection of the nature of the world he was born into, the inevitable consequence of someone who dares to carry the weight of the forgotten century on his back. Maybe those who understand too much, who go too far, and who hear what should not be heard, pay a price that the world itself imposes. I don't think Roger got sick just because his body failed. I think he might have absorbed something that the world was not made to carry, and that burden transformed into an inevitable wear, a kind of internal collapse that no doctor in the world could cure. I hope for your support to help our crew win, and to do so, you just need to click the thumbs up button, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you will win an incredible devil fruit, so just comment which fruit you want. Rayleigh said in chapter 506 that Roger was already sick when the last journey began. This is crucial. It shows that Roger started his final voyage with the full understanding that his time was limited. And if his time was limited, why did he still choose to set sail? Maybe he knew that the only way to justify his own existence, or even to ease the weight of what he had discovered, was to reach the end. Maybe what Roger carried wasn't just a disease, but a kind of connection to the world, to its true history, which made his body wither as he approached the truth. He didn't have an Akuma no Mai. This is something that was reiterated in chapter 1047. So the strength he had came purely from his spirit, from his haki, from the will to keep going even when his body was breaking. And maybe that is exactly what is connected to what happened to Luffy more recently. Because when Luffy activates Gear 5th, it doesn't seem like just a physical transformation. It feels like something that transcends human limitations. He smiles even when his body should break. He stretches, he reconfigures. He redefines himself in the face of the impossible. And this has a direct connection to what Roger could have been if he hadn't been held back by that illness. Maybe Roger's illness was the consequence of carrying the will of the world without the right body. And maybe Luffy's body is that right body. A body that, for some reason, adapted to that responsibility. Maybe Roger's illness was a side effect of the premature awakening of a connection to the world's true history, a symptom of someone who understood before his time. Meanwhile, Luffy, being who he is, having friends who share the journey, might be able to bear that weight without being consumed from within. In chapter 968, Crocus says he was called to take care of Roger, and he accepts because he knows the captain doesn't want to live. He just wants to keep going until the end. And that reinforces the idea that Roger knew he couldn't be saved. But what if deep down, he was already beginning to transform into something he couldn't control? Not physically, but spiritually. What if that illness was the world system trying to stop the birth of something greater? Something that now manifests in Luffy in a much more complete way? Because Luffy's awakening has traces of divinity, traces of humor, traces of madness, and a freedom that defies even the laws of physics. And all of this comes from the body. It's not a spiritual fight. It's not a mystical technique. It's Luffy's body that embodies it. Maybe Roger had that too, but his body couldn't handle it. Maybe the illness was the failure of the vessel. Maybe Luffy is the vessel that succeeded. And that makes us wonder, was Roger's illness the first symptom of Joy Boy's return? Was it not a disease in the traditional sense, but a mark, a warning, a first step in a process that could only be completed by someone like Luffy? If that's the case, then Luffy not only inherited Roger's will, but he inherited the burden and transformed it into strength. And the most curious thing is to think that Roger, despite everything, kept smiling. At the end of the journey, he laughed like Luffy laughs. He laughed like someone who understands everything but chooses to live as if everything is still yet to come. That laugh is the strongest point of connection between the two. The laugh that defies tragedy, the laugh that faces the end not as a limit, but as a passage. If Roger's illness was an obstacle that prevented Joy Boy from fully manifesting in him, then maybe Luffy is the corrected version of that same process. The illness, in this context, would be an intermediate stage. Something that reveals the world's attempt to awaken its true history before its time. Maybe Luffy, with his body shaped by adventure, by losses, by friendships, by the sun, is the only one capable of not breaking before that power. And it's no coincidence that the name of the chapter where Roger reaches Laugh Tale is Roger's Adventure, because up to that moment, everything he had lived was an adventure, a preparation, but he was not the final protagonist of that story. Maybe Roger accepted that? Maybe the illness was the final warning that his role was to open the way, not to cross the portal. Luffy, on the other hand, has already been through everything he needed to shape both body and soul. Impel Down, Marineford, Whole Cake, Wano. Each arc was a purification. Each fall was a step in preparing for something that Roger might have sensed, but that Luffy is going to accomplish. And maybe that's why Roger's illness is actually one of the most important elements of the narrative, because it marks the boundary of the old world and the beginning of the new. It is the frontier between what was possible back then and what becomes real with Luffy. If Roger felt pain, it was because his body was trying to keep up with what his soul was already screaming. And maybe that pain wasn't just a warning, but a call. Maybe the world, in trying to silence what Roger was discovering, imposed limits on his body to prevent the true will from blooming too early. Maybe Roger's body didn't get sick, maybe it was silenced. Yet he went anyway, yet he arrived, yet he laughed, and now, years later, the body that is receiving the same call is different. It's Luffy's body. And what changes here is precisely this. Luffy doesn't get sick when the truth approaches. Luffy doesn't back down when the will begins to overflow. Luffy doesn't break, he molds, he stretches, he grows, he transforms. I don't think Roger's illness ended when he departed. Maybe it continued latent, dormant in some corner of history, waiting for the right body, the right time, the right mind. Maybe it was waiting for someone who could not only withstand it, but accept it with open arms. And when Luffy laughed in Wano, with Gear 5th lit up, with his heart pounding like a drum, maybe that was the point where what was weakness in Roger became strength in Luffy. Maybe if Roger's body couldn't withstand what he saw, it's because that still needed to be digested. And that digestion may have been slow. It may have spanned generations. Because this story isn't just about knowing the truth. It's about the world accepting the truth. And maybe the world could only accept the truth when someone like Luffy, someone who never wanted glory, someone who only wanted freedom, became its bearer. If that's true, then maybe Roger's so-called illness is a reflection of what the world does when it feels it's about to lose control. It's as if the world has antibodies against joy boys who appear at the wrong time. And Roger may have been a joy boy out of time. That's why the world reacted. That's why his body failed. Not out of weakness, but from an excess of truth. And Luffy, for some reason, might have a body that doesn't suffer from this excess. Maybe it's precisely because he's light, because he's simple, because he's pure. Roger was a man marked by decisions, by sacrifices, by secrets. Luffy is a boy who smiles while eating meat, who saves others without even realizing it, who doesn't even understand the magnitude of his own presence. And maybe that's exactly what makes him fit. And if we stop to think, Luffy's transformation in chapter 1044 isn't just a physical transformation, it's as if the whole world is dancing with him. The clouds change, the weather changes, even the sound of the environment changes. And when Kaido asks who he is, he responds with that smile. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the man who will become the king of the pirates. But at that moment, it feels like Luffy is already more than that. He is the heartbeat of the world. Maybe Roger was an unfinished version of that. Maybe the illness was the symptom of a body that almost got there, but wasn't ready yet. And when we remember that Luffy also went through moments of collapse, in Impel Down, in Marineford, even in Dressrosa, when his body almost shut down after Gear 4th, you can feel that maybe he was adjusting little by little. Each arc strengthened not only his body but his spirit. Every friend saved, every injustice faced, every fall overcome molded this body to become the vessel for the will that Roger may have only touched. And if Luffy is indeed that, the living continuation of something the world tried to interrupt, then maybe Roger's illness was never a weakness, but a stage, a step, a transition. And now, with Luffy surpassing all these limits, maybe he'll not only become stronger, but the first to fully absorb this inheritance without losing parts of himself. Maybe Roger lost much of himself in the process. Maybe the exhaustion, the wounds, the farewell to all his friends before the end. Maybe all of that was part of the illness. An illness that isolated him. An illness that made him understand that his role was to begin the story, but not to tell it. And here's the most beautiful detail. Luffy is not alone. Luffy does not walk alone. He has Zoro, he has Nami, he has Sanji, Robin, Chopper, Brook, Jinbei, Usopp, Frankie, and each one of them represents a part of the world that Roger perhaps could not bring together. Each one of them is a link, and together, maybe they are the cure for that loneliness that may have been Roger's true poison. The whole world spins to keep the secrets of the Void Century buried, and when Roger unearthed those secrets, maybe he felt the world turning against him, and his body gave in. Luffy, on the other hand, doesn't try to unearth anything. He just lives. He just moves forward, and that's why the world might accept him differently. Maybe what was an illness in Roger is evolution in Luffy, and that's what makes Luffy more powerful. He doesn't carry the weight of the truth. He plays with it. He doesn't collapse in the face of revelation. He smiles, and that smile, that light heart, might be what was missing. Maybe what made Roger ill was the excess of gravity. Luffy is light, Luffy dances, That's why I think Roger's illness is the key to understanding what Luffy will become. Because what was once a burden that destroyed the body now becomes a force that rebuilds it. Luffy doesn't need to run from it. He dances with it. He laughs. And it's in that laugh that lies the difference between the two. What made Roger wither makes Luffy explode. What seemed like an end becomes a new beginning. And that's exactly why maybe Roger, even when he realized he was sick, smiled. Because he saw at some point that the world would one day have someone capable of carrying it without breaking. Someone who would not only laugh at the end, but would make the whole world laugh along. Would you like me to make the translation even more polished and literary? Or does it capture the essence well for you? That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.